Hello and welcome to the September edition of the Organic Gardening Podcast. I'm Fiona Taylor, and later on I'll be joined by my colleagues from Garden Organic, Chris Collins and Dr. Anton Rosenfeld. It's been a funny old summer. Lots and lots of rain has meant everything has stayed incredibly green, but it's been a bit disappointing for some of our favourite crops. It looks like we might get a burst of sunshine this month, so maybe my sweet corn will ripen and the chilli peppers will put out a few more fruits. Later on, we'll be hearing from Jane Davidson, former Minister of Government in Wales and dedicated organic smallholder. Jane has recently become Garden Organic's Vice President for Wales. And in our postbag, we'll be discussing the pros and cons of sowing in autumn or spring, as well as whether or not to lift carrots and parsnips from the ground in the winter months. Before all that, I'd just like to thank our sponsors, Viridian Nutrition. Viridian produces a range of award-winning, ethical and organic supplements, which include vitamins, minerals, herbal oils and balms. Known as the Vitamin Company with an organic heart, their supplements are stocked in over 1,000 specialist health stores across the UK. To find out more, visit their website, viridian-nutrition.com. And now I'm off to join Chris in our virtual potting shed.
Well, Chris, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Fiona. How are you?
I'm very well. You look well.
Thank you. We've had a little break. Did we have a little break over the summer?
Yes, I did, but it was a staycation, so plenty of time to reflect and look at the garden and think ahead and make plans and enjoy, what's been of this funny old summer we've had.
It's been a bit weird, isn't it? I was thinking of August. I quite like staying at home in August because everybody else goes and it's always crowded. But I like a bit of sunshine. We never got any this year, really, did we? In fact, the real last sunshine I saw was Glastonbury, which I'm glad about because it was quite expensive. But at least that was the last time I saw any. And the rest of the summer, it's been disappointing, very wet and cool, isn't it? It's a bit of a shame.
It is, and you get that time when it's a bit dark above, and then it's dark below because the trees are, in full leaf, and then the skies are grey above, and it all
the light levels have been low.
Yes.
They certainly have, and it sort of affects your mood a little bit. It certainly affects the mood of the plants, I think, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it does. I mean, what have you found, that it has affected?
Well, it's definitely what I might call my hot crops, which were quite successful last year.
Yeah, of course.
So, aubergines, I had great aubergines last year. They've kind of all come into flower, but I've had very little fruit off them.
Same as me.
But one success, and that was a dwarf one on my balcony, and that's given me a few. But apart from that, my tomatoes, most of them on the allotment, most of them haven't gone red. I think I tend to grow mine open grounds. And they also got blight quite early on as well. But I took them out. But I picked all the tomatoes just because the plant is they haven't gone red or the plant's suffering a bit. Doesn't mean to say you can't get some food out of it, because what I'll do is I'll just make a huge pesto and that can go in the freezer, and then that's great with pasta. So it's not a loss, but it's not been the bumper crop I had last year for those hot aubergines, peppers, chilies. Those kind of plants have been a bit disappointing this year. Loads of cucumbers for some reason. I don't know why.
Well, they like it cooler, don't they?
Yeah, I've got cucumbers coming out my ears.
Well, let's explore this tomato blight problem because I've been fortunate. I've managed to escape it so far, although I haven't had much of a yield off my tomatoes. I must say, I've got a sort of medium yield. They're just sort of turning gradually, a few a day, and I've got all these flowers at the top, and now it feels that little bit cooler. I just don't think they're going to do anything, but let's see. But I do have other friends of mine who have been totally wiped out by blight. Yeah,
it's quite common on my site. There's not much you can do about it, really. Some people treat them with diluted milk as they come through, like the potatoes. They do the same with the potatoes. You've got to be pretty organised for that. I'm not. And I think that because it's airborne, you kind of
once you've got it, you need to. So for people who haven't got it yet, what should they be looking out for?
Well, just look. You'll just get sudden dieback. So the plant will just curl and go brown. And so I've had whole plants that have just massive cell death, basically. And
on the fruit itself, you
get top rot, you get brown rotting at the top of the tomato as well, and then it will do the whole tomato. Even after you've picked it, you can still sometimes get the blight going through it. So it is pretty fatal, to be honest with you. It really is. So if you get sudden dieback, big brown parts of the tomato, then you know you've copped it, basically.
Yeah. So what about chopping back all the leaves and leaving it so that you can hope for the fruit?
In September, I think it's probably pretty tricky. Yeah.
Okay. You've sort of left it.
I think that go for the pesto is what I think is.
Go for pesto. Pick it and enjoy
go for
it.
The pesto.
Yeah, exactly. Make the best of a bad thing. All right.
The thing is, when you do allotment growing or vegetable growing. But it's just making sure you spread your bets, because it's the UK. We're never quite sure what we're going to get.
And actually, that's because we grow things from all over the world.
Yeah, all over the world, yeah. And sometimes you get a hot summer and the tomatoes love it. So it just depends what the climate's going to give us, basically, what kind of summer we have, growing season we have. Don't rely on one thing too much.
What's done well for you?
Well, like I say, brassicas have been good. I had some lovely swede and turnip I sowed quite early in the season. They were amazing. What else has done? I'm not a bad idea for salad crops, because normally I have trouble with them bolting if it's hot, so they haven't done that. So I've had a lot of really decent rocket cucumbers. I've had falling out. Oh, mate, I had to knock on my neighbour's door and give her 10 cucumbers the other day. She really didn't look like she wanted them. and so, yeah, they've done all right. So, I've been taking through July and August, now into September, pretty much, half a shopping bag to a shopping bag of food off my allotment every day. So it's really fed me. Yeah. Some crops have not been successful as others.
Yeah. Well, my courgettes have done okay. My rhubarb has been a joy, actually. But I've got a fig tree in my garden and it's covered in figs, but they won't ripen.
Yeah, they don't. They're a Mediterranean
exactly
plant.
They
need the heat. They need the heat. They get them on my allotment in London. All the old Greek lads. There's quite a lot of Greek Cypriot community on there. They've all got these different figs, but I think they're a little bit cheeky. I think they know which varieties work and which ones don't, and they're quite possessive about it. But if I chat up, there's a little old lady just at the back of me. I chat her up sometimes. She gives me a nice bowl of figs.
Yes,
because they are amazing.
They are amazing. Yeah. And I mean, I have to say, it's usually really, really prolific, that tree. It's
I think they're not going to ripen without the sunshine. That's the thing.
No.
Yeah.
But a good year for soft fruit.
Yes, well, they like the cooler temperatures. Obviously, I mean, Scotland famous for its soft fruit. That's where a lot of British soft fruit's grown. So
yeah, the strawberries and the raspberries seem to have done really well. I didn't grow any myself. I went to a pick your own recently, and it was brilliant. Yeah. There were absolutely loads and loads of them. It's fantastic. So I've been jam making, and the other thing I did for the first time is I pickled some cucumbers. And I thought pickled cucumbers was something that you had to do and then leave them for months on end before you ate them. Rubbish!
No, you can do it quickly.
You just do it and eat them almost straight away. Well, maybe that's the solution
for my cucumber glut.
Yes, it is a solution. It is a solution. Yeah,
I'll put Mrs. Collins onto that straight away for you.
Let me know how she gets on. Yeah. Looking out to the garden, wanting it to look nice during the autumn, of course. Yeah. Kind of like the grass to look a bit nicer. What would you advise to kind of bring a lawn back at this stage? Because ours has just been, it's almost been too wet, so difficult to mow. It just doesn't look
it's been,
good at all.
Obviously, I mean, this is as a professional gardener or as a groundsman, as I've been in the past, autumn's quite an important time, so I'll give it quite a lot of treatments. Obviously, the big thing with grass is aeration, is making sure the roots can get down. If you're on a heavy clay, grass will always struggle. It'll always look a bit thin. In a little way, it's not such a bad thing for an organic garden, because maybe your clovers and your daisies will come in.
Absolutely.
And fill it in, you see. But so it depends on, what you're after. But I think if you want a nice thick sward, this time of year, I would probably tine it, which means you literally punch holes in it. You could do it with a garden fork just to break any pan that's under the surface so the soil could drain. Scarifying, you've heard me talk about this so many times on the blog. Scarifying is my favourite trick for lawn care. And if you get a lawn rake, if you've got a massive lawn, you might need a machine to do it. If you get a lawn rake, what you're basically doing is you're taking out all the dead grass that's underneath the live grass, and then you break the stolons, the underground stems, and it causes the grass to tiller, which means you just get a thicker sward. You get more grass growth coming out of the stems. That really works. And I'd probably overseed it in September. Definitely late September, I'd overseed it, bit of rye, a bit of Kentucky blue, maybe quite hard sort of grasses if it's used a lot, pets and football or whatever, and then get it going again. Yeah, aeration, scarification, overseed. That were my 3 tips for that.
Right, okay, that sorts the grass out. Now we're looking across the flower beds.
Yes.
All right. So it's a brilliant time of year to be thinking about next year, isn't it? I always think that. It always encourages me. Rather than dwelling on, the summer that's just been, let's look ahead to next year when it's going to be glorious and it's going to be full of colour and joy and fruit, flowers and the whole thing. So tell me, right now, what could I be doing to really give my flower beds a boost?
Well, it's interesting with flowers, isn't it? Because they mainly flowers like herbaceous or whatever, even a lot of the bedding, they're summer based, like so. Not you can get plenty of flowers in the winter if you go for more shrubs, daphnes, sarcococca, this sort of stuff.
Oh, I love a daphne.
And you get that sense as well. So it's not time not for flowers. It's just the form of the plant is going to change a little bit. Okay, so you can get a lot going on in the winter, but you just need to think about different types of plants. You also want to think about tassels, Gary, elliptica, stuff like that. You get these beautiful Itiris foliage, Tibetan cherry with a beautiful red shiny bark. Also, there's other ways you can get colour into the garden.
Yes,
you see. So you just have to think a bit more holistically about it. If you really, really want flower, obviously put your spring bedding in now. Put your viola in, maybe for later in the year, your forget-me-nots, your wallflowers, they'll give you flower at the end of the spring. Obviously, it's going to be bulb time soon. We'll be filling up all the bulbs. So even your snowdrops will be out in January, February. So there's all that you can put in as well. I love the autumn, and this is where my head's starting to think. I just love the idea, as you mentioned, the planning in it. I love the fact that I can now move the chess pieces around. I think that's quite a nice way of looking at it. So I'm thinking of a Gertrude Jekyll border.
I say. Is this on the allotment?
Only the best on my allotment.
Splendid.
And what she used to do herbaceous borders where she would go softs or cools to hots. And so she would have all the sort of cooler colours, Artemisia, maybe pink, white phloxes, light pink phloxes, Macleas, and then she put all the hot colours in the middle. So maybe you could have canna in there, or red salvias, purple salvias, orange plants like geums. So you get you can imagine it, these cool into hot. And it's just a nice little way to think about it. But obviously that's for next year. I will probably lift and divide to create that with the existing herbaceous I've got. Maybe bring a few new plants in. If you're not touching your herbaceous, leave the tops on. They're great for nature. They look great in the silver frost, but you can have a little plan away this time of year.
So I have a whole load of dahlias that I planted this year, and they have bushed up into nice plants, but the flowers have been so late that I'm a bit reluctant. I want to see if I'm going to get, at least a flush of flowers off them. But I've got a few buds, but they haven't come into flowers. Obviously, we're talking now right at the beginning of September. However, if it's going to be a different conditions next year, quite likely to be different conditions next year, what would you advise for those sorts of plants that actually you can then bring them inside, bring the tubers inside? Because if I'm nervous about lifting a dahlia that hasn't yet flowered.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't worry about this. I wouldn't lift anything until first frost for a start.
Right, okay.
So you'll see a dahlia, they'll just, first cold night, they'll just blacken up.
It'll just go, absolutely.
And then I was always taught by my my peers in the parks and stuff to lift them, because especially if you're on heavy soils, they'll rot quite easily and they're left in wet ground. And we've had a wet summer. So what I do is I lift them, and then you'll see on them the eyes, like a potato almost, these buds that sit on them. I would then shave those off, into a strip with a bit underneath, and store them in sand. You do that in the greenhouse, cooler temperatures, and let them overwinter like that, and then get them away again in the spring. You'll see them starting to shoot.
So it's a cluster of kind of oval-shaped, tubers.
Yes.
So does that cluster have to stay together, or can you actually
You can divide, yeah. This is the beauty of everything herbaceous. You can divide. And another thing I was taught as a gardener, like herbaceous borders, really every 3 to 4 years you should lift and divide an herbaceous plant, because what will happen in its natural environment, it will want to spread. So you tend to have the centre of the plant tends to die out as the plant works its way out. To prevent that, lift and divide, you'll keep those crowns nice and tight, basically.
Okay, and can you go down to literally one of those tubers?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah,
take
those tubers up and pot it in a nice sandy soil, gravelly soil, and let it get away in the spring. Is not a problem at all. You tend to find the dahlias I've lifted and divided. You think you put them in back in the ground and they don't appear for quite a long time. You think, I've done something. Actually, no, they can come really late dahlias. My dahlias have been really late this year, but I've got flowers the size of dinner plates at the moment. They are spectacular. I think you just got to be a bit patient with them.
I'm going to give them a few more weeks. Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I'm late with my sunflowers as well, and they're tall and they've formed the bud. Yeah, but they're just not wanting to come out.
I'll stick with it. We could do a couple of sunny weeks in September.
We could. Yeah, we really do need that late summer, don't we? We really do. So if you then have done all your lifting and your dividing, and you've sorted out your Gertrude Jekyll border.
Yes, we've got to check the border.
All the rest of it. There's probably a little bit of housekeeping needing to be done on the compost heap, I would have thought.
Yeah, well, I've suggested, I certainly will do it one last turn before the temperature starts to drop. I said before, I like to turn with my hands because my arms, because I love getting dirty. No, but also I get slow worms in there, so I'm quite careful. But I have got, that's I said, I will never put compost out until the spring, early spring.
Right, that's what I was going to ask you.
Because otherwise it just sits there, the nutrient leaches through. I remember being at Kew years ago, they found out they were heavily mulching in the autumn and it was affecting pH and it wasn't breaking down because there's not the bacteria in the brain. So I prefer, unless I'm trying to protect a tender plant around the base of the mulch, I will always mulch in the spring. So I'll give it one last turn for the moment. I might give it another one in the winter, but then I'll worry about it in the spring. That's probably what will happen. I like to keep an eye on the moisture content. I don't want it drying out too much, so I might flip a few. If we get a dry winter, I might put a bit of water on it, that's for sure. I do have one bay that's just full of pernicious weeds, so that's all cooch and horsetail. That's a dilemma because they'll just stay and you'll put them back out and the roots, they'll just keep going. They're incredible. So I'm maybe thinking of doing a big tea, so I'll drown them. If it's not too smelly.
So you'll sort of sieve them out, as it were.
And then you can see. Yeah, you'll see it all in there. You'll see. Yeah. So I'll dig it out with a shovel, and I'll be very careful doing that. But I'll dig that out, and then I'll see what's still there, and I'll drown them. I think I could use that as a tea as well.
Yeah. Okay. Good advice. So I must just tell you about my pond, which has been lovely this year, although has got very overgrown around the edges because it's just been so wet. I've not got down there, and of course there's all this lush growth because of all the rain. But I'm delighted to say that I appear to have got on top of the blanket weed. I did treat it with liquid barley straw, kind of, once a week or so during the early part of the summer, which I'm sure has made a difference. But I am curious. I have never used a hose on it because I'm very, very lucky, and it's most unusual, I realise this, but I share a well with my next door neighbour. We're a semi-detached house. There's a well between the two houses, and the pH of the water in the well was absolutely the right pH for a pond. Yeah. So, and it's rainwater, of course, because that's what a well's full of. So I've never put hose water in it.
I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, I wondered.
Yeah, I think it makes a big difference. Because you think about it, London water's got chlorine in it, nitrates in it. There's quite a lot of chemicals in our drinking water for various reasons. So I think that certainly the rainwater will mean you get less algae, less this sort, less invasive species. I think if you've got that balance in your pond, it sounds like what's happening. So
probably the advice to people is if you possibly can, top up your pond off your water butts.
Absolutely, catch it if you can. Yes. Get your butts out and catch that rainwater.
What a lovely vision that is. I'm going to ask you what you're sowing now.
I'll still put a little bit of salad crop in. I've still got my salad bar. I'll still on the allotment. I just literally a few days ago I put in salad rocket and some cut and come again, bit of lettuce. So I'm still doing that. It's quite a nice time to do it because I know they're not going to bolt, which really helps. I'll put in some Swede and turnips again. They probably won't get very big, but I'll let them sit for the winter. They seem to be fine doing that.
Well that's handy, isn't it?
Yeah, I have to cover them, otherwise the pigeons will eat them to pieces. So I have to put them in under the netting and stuff. But that'll do right. I could sow some hardy annuals now if I wanted. Gadisha, Californian poppy, cornflower, all that kind of stuff. I could do that now. I might do that, in fact, and then they'll go out in the spring. It all just depends. That's a choice, really. I prefer to do hardy annuals very early spring because I think they're less prone to attack from slugs, etc.
Yeah. And just reflecting back on this year, so on your allotment, have you found that those plants more native to us, those ones, perhaps the brassicas in particular, have done a lot better this year?
I've only had one real dilemma on my brassicas and my kale. We get an outdoor whitefly, which I expect has come out of the greenhouse at some point. And so I do get a bit on there. I remember a few years ago when we had a really mild winter, you could hit the kale and just a cloud would appear. Yes. I've got a little bit on there, but that don't... some people might be fussy about this. I just wash that off. I'll wash that off. It goes off under the tap. It never really seems to cause too much of a dilemma for me. And then I don't even bother cooking kale. I'll have a dose of lemon and a bit of olive oil and I'm away. So I wouldn't let it, unless it was a massive infestation, I wouldn't worry so much.
And when it comes to brassicas, do you net yours?
Yes, I've got a cage, a big cage. It grates me a bit because I get it all looking beautiful with the hardy annuals. I've got this big green thing in the middle of it.
Yeah,
So,
they are ugly, aren't they?
Yeah, it does. But the brassicas inside look amazing because nothing's infiltrating.
Yeah.
My main problem with brassicas is pigeons, and I am even more so than any cabbage white butterfly, to be honest with you. So I need to net them really, and they do look mighty fine. And I like the idea of being able to graze them through the winter. That's kind of why I do it.
Well, I have to say, with all this planning ahead, I think you're going to have a wonderful year next year, and I'm very inspired to think about doing some of the same stuff myself.
It's always something to look forward to in this game, Fiona.
Definitely. Lovely to talk to you, Chris.
And you, Fiona.
Now, Garden Organic's founder, Lawrence Hills, wrote books all about organic growing, and the younger generation of his day relished the challenge to conventional horticulture. Amongst them a couple called Guy and Jane Davidson, who have been lifelong organic gardeners and now have a small holding. Jane was a teacher and then moved across into politics and held several portfolios, one being Minister for the Environment for Wales. In 2015, Jane spearheaded the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which meant that all public bodies now have to, by law, consider the impact of every decision they make on future generations. It's a groundbreaking piece of legislation and strikes a real chord with those of us who believe that organic gardening and farming makes the world a better place for our children. Recently, I caught up with Jane, and I asked her first to explain exactly where she lives.
We're in North Pembrokeshire in a village called St Dogmell's. In terms of our climate, we're one of those areas which is a microclimate because of being very close to an estuary. We are on the kind of lowest category of land, peripheral sheep grazing, which always interests me in the sense that, I think we're growing 143 different things this year, and we can grow all those things here. But the land itself is not good in the sense that when we first moved here 10 years ago, we had to bring in about 12 tons of topsoil just to cover the shale. But because we garden organically, we have just built the soil. And my soil in my area is probably now 0.5 metre of soil to work with. And that's really important, is that we can do these things on very unpromising ground. The area that Guy grows in was a market garden 30 years ago. So actually he started, we're not competitive or anything, but he started with an advantage in the sense that somebody had already done the organic work on that garden. And when we first moved in, we didn't even know we had a greenhouse because everything was covered in brambles. We cut down basically 10 foot of brambles.
Did you dig them out, Jane?
Yeah, we dug them out, apart from around the edges. So, brambles are really, really important. We keep bees. Brambles are really, really important in terms of the flowers, but also the incredible, blackberry produce that you get every year. So we dug them out in order to create the growing space in which Guy has his quite traditional Lawrence Hills 26 raised beds. And when we talk about having a book in your pocket, a muddy book in your pocket, it is Lawrence Hill's book that Guy has.
That's amazing to think that our founder, is still very much having great influence. And you've talked a little bit about the challenges that you faced when you arrived in certain parts of the site and needing to bring in the topsoil and then improving that, presumably with your own compost and all sorts of other kind of organic methods. But really now, what are the challenges? What is it that you have to sort of battle against?
Well, I think the challenges change every year in a way. I think we've pretty well worked out what grows well every year. And so they are our staples and we have no worries about that. But literally 1 year, the pigeons will eat the top off all the peas. Well, actually, I should say every year the pigeons eat the top off all the peas, unless we've netted them early enough. But 1 year you'll get something, and peas actually don't grow well here. Peas are troublesome, and we've tried all sorts of different varieties. We'll always have a crop, but it's always a small crop for the amount of peas we put in the ground. So you just get things that don't grow well. My blueberries never come to much. I mean, obviously they like an acid soil anyway, and maybe I don't apply enough pine needles to them. Maybe I should separate them out, but they look very nice. They're sturdy plants, but they don't fruit very much. So you also learn what works in your area, and I think that's always a sort of really good starting position, is what other people are able to grow. Anything in the camellia family grows incredibly well. And you just see it, you see them in everybody's gardens, and they are extraordinary. Anything in the jasmine family appears to grow incredibly well here too. So for people who like flowers, you can actually focus on the ones that do well. And I think the other thing is that we do quite a lot of exchanging. So some people who are much more precise than us in the way they garden may grow interesting things that we don't. But they deliberately won't grow courgettes because they have about 10 neighbours who could give them courgettes at this time of year. So I think that one of the great things about gardening is also all that exchange. So whether it's the pickles, whether it's the jams and the jellies, whether it's the cider, we make many, many gallons of cider from our apples and perry from the pears. You have something to exchange with people. You have something to take to people's houses. And we've been doing this whatever size garden we have. We're actually doing this on about half an acre here. But when we were living in the city, we had a really thin but 100-foot of garden. And we deliberately chose a house that was south-facing with a long garden. But then we fell in love with a house that was in a north-facing valley with a very, very steep tiered garden that was just impossible for growing, but we still managed soft fruit.
Right plant, right place, and all that sort of stuff you find.
Right plant, right place. Yes. And it doesn't matter how big a piece of land you have. I mean, we grew avocados from avocado pips on windowsills when I was a child in Africa, and then they went out into the garden. Now, that wouldn't work for a fruit here, but actually you can grow many other things on windowsills that then could go out in the garden here. And so what we've done with our kids is we grow tomatoes on windowsills first, and then they go outside, and then they get planted, and then they get harvested by them. So there's so many ways in which gardening, it just opens up your eyes to everything, the seasons, the weather.
As they say, there's a lot of weather in Wales. What are you noticing about the weather and the climate conditions?
Well, the seasons are breaking down, but in my sort of professional work, I look at issues related to climate and sustainability. So they're breaking down in ways I would expect, but ways that not everybody expects. And I think that what very much happens in the context of growing is that we used to be able to rely on a sort of wet spring and a relatively dry summer. And that's been largely inverted this year. And of course, what it has meant is that, our garlic, which is now out of the ground, is only only 2/3 the size it would normally be. Our onions, we had to really water heavily in terms of making sure we had decent sized onions, etc. So water is becoming a real issue. And we try and do one big green thing every year, and we've got water butts on most of our downpipes, but we are going to put water butts on all our downpipes. Round the house, we've got a cabin where we grow our veg. We've got on our greenhouses, we're going to put water butts as well. So I think we have to get into the mental frame that we have to save these precious resources as much as possible.
I'm interested to hear what you've just said about putting a water butt on every single downpipe. It's something it's a challenge I might pick up myself, actually. We've increased ours, but I might follow your lead on that. I think that's a very interesting challenge. How do these fantastic and inspiring principles for day-to-day living, which an awful lot of us also aspire to. We as organic gardeners, we're thinking about a lot of this ourselves. We know our resources are precious, but for you, your day-to-day living actually also mirrors your professional life and your aspiration for being on a mission around sustainability and promoting sustainability in everything that you do in the public realm. And I wonder if you could just talk about that and perhaps the connection between the two.
I was brought up in Africa, in Zimbabwe, where my father went to start a medical school there. So I spent my life from the age of sort of 4 to 15, growing up in what was then Salisbury, now Harare. And I'm a very outdoors person in any weather. And that love of nature started very young for me. It started just on being on my bike, going out into the veldt, and learning to be a bit careful, looking out for snakes, those sorts of things, because you learn about your natural environment, and that was mine. So there might be an antelope that would jump up in front of me. There might be a snake. There might well be monkeys. There certainly would be lots of birds, but we didn't have any of the sort of big game near us, and so I was never really at any risk apart from being unwary. But just the being in nature, and then the sitting watching nature was something that I did without knowing it had a name. So I'm always consider myself somebody who, I'm an environmentalist without ever knowing that was a thing.
It just is.
It just is. And I think it is about, this is where I think that the old Aristotle saying that was also picked up by Ignatius Loyola, which is, give me the child of 7 and I'll give you the man. So I am absolutely passionate about the idea that if we work with really young children about the value of nature, then actually we can breed habits, and we sustain that throughout their childhood lives. We can breed habits that will sustain us forevermore. I mean, Guy, my husband, the grower, he was a member of Walton-on-Thames Young Naturalists at the age of 5. He still is the best creature spotter I've ever seen. He literally can spot them in a field, a pheasant or a deer or anything. His eye is just there, and that's a learned skill, and we could all have that skill. So I think it's valuing it is really, really important. And I suppose I was really conscious I valued nature, so we always went for holidays in beautiful places. And it was the place rather than activities that attracted us. As a family, we might well be camping by a waterfall where we could swim in it or whatever. But I think that where it linked to my professional life was one of those epiphany moments when I was asked to take on the environment and climate change portfolio. The technical title was Environment, Sustainability and Housing, back in 2007. And I always research everything I do. And I didn't know, well, none of us really knew much about climate change at the time, apart from the scientists who've been trying to shout for 30 years into kind of oblivion. And it was deeply shocking to see that effectively fossil fuels, I mean, they are the biggest, most evil element of this. So, if your lives are kind of fueled by oil or gas or both, and of course most of our lives are, then actually we were contributing towards an impossible life for our children. And it was kind of, for me, it was one of those massive wake-up calls. And we literally, as a family, we decided to try and do one big green thing every year to take us off as a family, as much as possible, the reliance on the things that were causing a problem. And then that becomes a way of life. So, we started with, kind of like moving off gas central heating. We changed our cars. We started using bicycles more. We started using the train more. We started walking more. And if you start thinking about this as a value system and trying to take that out of every part of your life, it changes everything. It changes what you eat. It changes how you travel to places. It changes what buildings you live in or what buildings you're prepared to work in. It changes what energy source you have. I mean, from that moment, we went to, and there's still only a tiny number of real renewable energy companies in the UK from which you can buy green energy. And we changed to that. So we've now, in every aspect of our lives, I only go for fashion if I know that, some could say I don't go for fashion at all. But in a sense, we even do this in terms of the clothes we buy. We try and only use sort of fair trade cotton. We try and make sure that there is no kind of like appalling child labour use. So suddenly, you end up thinking you're thinking about one thing, but it takes you into the territory where you realise that the unthinking choices we make are normally about what's best for me. And the unthinking, and now I'm trying to do thinking choices in every decision I make about what's best for me and the planet. And by the planet, I mean the rest of humanity and nature. So it's no longer, it's not an I, it's a we. And so in one sense, one could say it's a moral code, but really it's a set of values. How much do you care? I mean, we've all got, I don't mean everybody has kids and grandchildren, because that's obviously not the case. But as humanity, we all have kind of older people we love and children we love. And I think that is pretty ubiquitous. And actually, not being able to look a child in the eye and say, I'm doing everything I can to give you a good life, just seems to me untenable. So my whole life now is predicated on how we can all behave better to give current and future generations a better chance at a better life, when we know that these big climate challenges, these big nature challenges, the climate challenge is we're likely to exceed the 1.5 degrees that's the safe place for humanity this year. Although it'll probably go back down again, but it's like the massive wake-up call, and we've lost 70% of species in my lifetime. And that's another massive wake-up call. So how do we get all of us to be thinking about how to make life better for us all? Because that has to be the best future for humanity.
You've made it really clear that you are absolutely passionate about the next generation, the people who come after us, and wanting to leave the world with an intention for a better future than currently it seems that is possible. And your political work culminated in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which came in Wales in 2015. Can you just talk to us about that achievement, because it is a phenomenal achievement, and how it is now being picked up and replicated by other countries around the world?
Thank you. And I think that it kind of almost goes back to that old Chinese proverb about every journey begins with the first step. And the first step for Wales was actually linked to a Parliament giving Wales a duty to promote sustainable development in everything it did when it passed the Government of Wales Act in 1998. And that duty wasn't given to Scotland or Northern Ireland. So it was a unique duty given to Wales at the beginning of the new devolved nations and having their own parliaments. And we just tried our best to make it work. And for the last 4 years of my life as a minister, I had this responsibility. And it became clear to me towards the end of that a duty to promote isn't enough, because I'm promoting to you now. I'm promoting to you with every fibre of my being, every day of my life. So you've got to have a duty to deliver. And that was the realisation that we came to. So essentially, I wrote the architecture of what a duty to deliver could look like. It needed to be linked to the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, because all countries that are members of the UN have signed up. So that's, nearly 200 countries have signed up to deliver on Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. So linking it to the Sustainable Development Goals was really important in terms of creating legislation that would have a voice in the world. The government itself needed to be accountable to it, because most governments make laws for others. But by the government itself being accountable to it, it meant that the government would be able to show leadership. So you needed external accountability, which is a Future Generations Commissioner, entirely independent of government, but also external accountability through the Auditor General, who audits all the public services. So for me, this is very much about systems thinking, about values. So you now, in Wales, there is a duty to deliver on 7 goals linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. You would expect them to be, how do we increase biodiversity? How do we tackle climate? How do we redefine prosperity in a low carbon way? How do we protect culture and language for future generations? How do we make people healthier, not by counting ambulances, but actually what are the conditions for good health? How do we make our communities safer and more vibrant? How do we globally, for example, make sure that anything we do when we have a relationship with anywhere else in the world, do it in the same spirit as we act in Wales. And those goals have just released imagination of people in terms of doing completely different kinds of actions. And it is the permission to think differently. But what's also very unusual about the Act, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, is that it has, on the face of it, the goals, and the 5 ways of working are: you have to think preventatively, you have to collaborate with others, you have to think long term, you have to involve people in how decisions are made, and you have to integrate the outcomes. That's your co-benefits. So having a what and a how on the face of the Act meant that people know how to do it, as well as knowing what they want to achieve. And the what and the how together, I think, are critically important. The Act was passed 4 years after I left government, but wasn't implemented until the following year, 5 years after I left government. But what I'm delighted about is the fact that all those principles of the architecture that I thought were essential as a result of my previous work were all maintained, which is why, people credit me with the architecture of the Act. But I want to credit all those politicians who actually interrogated this, day after day in committee to decide how to create an Act that would meaningfully change how government engage with the people of Wales, meaningfully, and change the values framework for the government, and pass that legislation. So it's never one person. So I might have been a catalyst, but actually it's that generation of politicians who cared so deeply about future generations and who utterly understood about the climate and nature crisis. And that means that what I'm doing now, as chair of Wales Net Zero, it could not have happened without the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act.
How can we help in our day-to-day lives with those lofty aims?
I think the really important aspect is the lofty aims have to be translated into actions in a local household. So, our decision to grow as much of our own food as we can without pesticides also leads us to trying to avoid pesticides when we buy food. We buy very little processed food, for example, because actually just a food processor can process tomatoes or anything else. Freezers can deal with the produce. So I think that in a sense, that a house with the modern equipment can do all the things we're doing at a smaller scale. But the enjoyment of it and the taste of it is extraordinary. And I think the other aspect is that once you start gardening organically, you see how the soil changes. And that's I think actually that's a sort of unsung part of this story. But we compost all our vegetables. We add horse dung to it regularly. We add seaweed fertilizer to it, for example. But just in a sense, when I'm digging the compost when it's ready, it is just a tangle of earthworms. And you have to be really, really. In fact, I do it with a fork rather than a spade because of the fact that I don't. I want to just go in gently and come out dangling.
I think we all apologise to earthworms quite regularly. Yes.
Yeah, but I just think, and then when you see what it does in terms of the ground as well, it changes the nature of the soil. So we feel that there are many, many different kinds of gardening. And around me, there are people who do no dig. There's a lot of people who do permaculture. There's a lot of people who grow biodynamically. And we just feel that there are all these different kinds of ways of gardening, which can actually end up with people who should all be on the same side of the coin, just fighting about which is best. They're all the same principle. None of us use pesticides. All of us try to work with nature. And I think that those of us on the side of nature, nature-friendly gardening, and we're all organic in its broadest definition as well. All of us who want to be nature-friendly and are therefore organic, we need to rise up as a movement in terms of actually helping others to do it too. Because you can actually have a beautiful, more traditional garden, but do it organically. Because in the previous house we had, where we found it much more difficult to grow vegetables, I actually grew perfectly good flower garden with shade plants, but still organically. And so, for 30 years, we have grown organically, and our appetite for it has grown commensurately as well.
Absolutely. And we're here to raise the next organic generation. Jane Davidson, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Right, time for the post bag. I'm here with Anton and Chris. We've got some crackers this month, as usual, but of course people are beginning to look towards the winter and what they can grow during the winter. So, first question, carrots and parsnips. This year, I've had great success with growing carrots and parsnips, more than I can eat at the moment. Would you recommend harvesting and storing them before it gets too cold, or will they last better left in the ground? So, Chris, what's your response to this?
Well, I've kind of got a double-edged sword here, really, speaking about my own personal crops. Parsnips I've left in the ground the last couple of years. Sometimes in the past I've dug them up, put them in sand and stuff, but I've left them in the ground and they've been absolutely delicious. And I just think that cold weather really sweetens them up. There's something about them. I try to have them on Christmas Day, my good old famous Christmas Day dinner. So I prefer to leave them in the ground. I don't seem to have any problems with pests with them. There is a problem with frosts, maybe if you get very heavy frost. Don't get a lot of those in London, but I get some straw and I'd put it down just to protect the tops of the parsnip. But I've had no problem leaving them in the ground at all. Carrots, well, on my site, I get a lot of carrot fly. And they tend to bore into it. You can pull one out. There's a lot of small holes, all of them. So I tend to grow them in containers. I grow a little one called Globe. I grow that in the containers because of the height. Carrot fly only got so high. But if you did have a big problem, if I was really committed, I might net against carrot fly, but I tend not to. So it's a parsnip story for me, really.
Right, that's all about leaving them in from Chris. So, Anton, what's the arguments for perhaps taking them out?
So there's a couple of arguments for taking them out. It might be that you know that there's going to be a really hard frost, and that's more of a problem with carrots, really. Carrots really will not withstand being in a frozen soil. What it tends to do is you find the tops rot off first, and then they tend to rot through to the core as well. And so sometimes even the carrot looks all right, but you find it's actually got a slimy core down the middle of it, which is really quite disgusting. If you know there's going to be a hard frost, then harvest your carrots. A layer of straw and a layer of fleece will actually sort of help to some extent. But if it's a really, really hard frost, then like the one we got last winter, then that really caused quite a few people out. Parsnips, actually, the frost improves the flavour, and it's not an old wives' tale that parsnips taste better when left in the ground after a frost. There's actually a biochemical reason. And that is what happens is under colder conditions, the starches get converted into sugars. Parsnips taste better after the first frost.
Oh, gosh, that's amazing. If you presumably have got to the stage where it's going to be a great crop, and you got through the season and you managed to combat the slugs and the carrot fly, and you're okay to leave them in because of the frost, then I can see all those arguments for leaving them in. But presumably leaving them in would encourage pests. Is that right?
Yeah, if you've already got a pest problem, then that pest problem will gradually get worse. So I would be more inclined to perhaps take them out then, particularly if it's going to be a mild winter, because that's when the sort of slugs and the carrot fly are more likely to remain active. In that case, I would probably take them out, and then you might want to store them in damp sand. And you need to keep that sand quite damp as well. You will probably actually need to water it otherwise, because it does tend to dry out. But that's quite a lot more faff for most people. So it's a question of whether you've got the sort of space and facilities to do that. It is easier to leave them in the ground.
Yes, but that's interesting. I didn't realise you had to dampen the sand.
Yeah, don't stop it drying out. I was just wondering with carrot fly is so really once you've got it, once it's in the ground, like my allotment site, everybody suffers from it. So once it's there, it becomes quite prevalent, doesn't it? Once it's present, you think it gets worse, and that's why it's pointless me leaving them in the ground because they just get attacked so heavily.
If they've been eating away at the roots, then they're perhaps more likely to sort of get rotted as well when that happens. So.
Yeah. Nobody wants a slimy core.
No.
They really don't. They really don't. All right, then. Number 2, I have a few packets of seeds that say you can sow in autumn or spring, including sweet peas and broad beans. So what's the advantage of doing one over the other? So, Chris, talk us through your sweet pea and broad bean sowing.
Well, I know that. I mean, this is an either or to me, I think, in a way, because I know people on my allotment site that always put broad beans in the autumn. And I think the reason they do that is they get away quicker in the spring. You get an earlier crop. And also maybe the apes get round to the usual black fly infestations we have. We tend to get them really bad on the site there. I tend to do mine in the spring. I don't know whether that's just because out of habit, but I'll just start them in ribbed trainers, basically, so they get nice deep roots and they'll go in very early spring. So it's a choice, really. A lot of gardeners I know swear by sweet pea to go in the autumn. They think you get less trouble with pest and disease. The gardeners at Westminster Abbey, which I still chat to, they will grow all their sweet peas in the autumn, leave them in the greenhouse and then plant them out in the spring, early spring. So, but I think it's an either or choice.
What do you reckon, Anton? I mean, I think it's a question of whether you're brave enough to put them in the ground or whether actually you perhaps sort of yearn over them a bit more. I don't know.
I think it perhaps depends where you are in the country as well, because I've certainly found that if you get a really hard frost over the winter, then the broad beans, especially if you've let them get too large, can be killed off by a hard frost. So I personally tend to sow them in the spring just for that reason.
There's not just broad beans though, is there? I mean, you seem to have a huge amount of knowledge around field beans, Anton. So is there some way we could go through the winter with field beans?
Field beans is quite an interesting one because they are actually grown extensively in the UK, but we export quite a lot of it to North Africa because they eat them in hummus and falafels there. So It's quite an interesting one. We haven't really developed a taste for them ourselves, but I actually think field beans are really, really tasty. They're actually the same species as broad beans, but they are considerably smaller. I found we get bigger yields off them, but there's more podding because you get a large number of small beans, but they are really sweet and worth trying.
Okay, field beans, that's brilliant, which of course we know as a green manure, but you can also grow them as a crop, and you can start them in the autumn.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Right, on to question number 3, all about salad. I'd like to keep my salad crops growing through autumn and winter. Is this possible if you don't have a greenhouse or a polytunnel? And if so, what varieties would you recommend? So I'm going to go to you, Anton, first. For what varieties would you recommend?
Well, I actually get a lot more excited by the salads that you can grow over the winter. There's a sort of massive range of really tasty things you can grow. I'm a bit of a mustard head. I really love the taste of spicy things. So I would definitely go for the salad rocket, which got a nice peppery taste. Mizuna as well is really good. It really is productive over the winter, and you can get different colours as well. You can get purple Mizuna as well as the ordinary coloured one. There's various mustards which are sort of quite resilient to frost, like the sort of winter red mustard, but if you get a really hard frost, then that will probably kill them off. So it just sort of depends on where you are. If you don't like the taste of mustard, not everybody does, then there are sort of more sort of plain tasting things. Claytonia is a really sort of productive thing. It keeps on going right into the spring, and even when it's flowering, it still seems to taste okay as well, which a lot of other things start to taste a bit bitter when they're flowering. So that's something that's really worth growing as well. There's corn salad. Again, that's a little less productive, quite bland, but is able to withstand really sort of cold weather. And then there's sort of good old-fashioned lettuces as well, which will withstand the cold winter. So there's one, clues in the name really, Marvel of Four Seasons. That's a good old-fashioned butterhead one, which is really nice and colourful as well. That works really well. And then there's sort of winter density little gem as well, if you want something that has a head on it as well. So we think of sort of salads as being a summer thing, but actually I think the winter's more exciting for salads.
And in terms of yield, I mean, if somebody's not got a greenhouse, perhaps don't want to put them in the ground, a bit worried about the slugs or whatever, how many pots and what sort of size of pots would you need to sort of keep your, I don't know, keep 2 of you or 4 of you in salad sort of through the winter months?
So just from my own experience, we tend to just have about 6 30-centimetre pots, and that keeps us in salad most of the winter. I would say over December and January, just because the light levels are so low, then things do grow quite a bit more slowly. Don't give up at that time. Don't think, it's just fizzled out, because you'll find in February it really gets a revival and becomes really productive right the way into sort of March and April. Okay,
so that's 6 30-centimetre pots, and your household is how many people?
Just the 2 of us.
All right, so for 4 people, we'd double that. Okay, I remember one year I grew them and was so delighted with them, I didn't want to pick them, and then did pick them in February, and it was the hottest salad I'd ever tasted. It was just extraordinary. It really blew your head off. It was amazing, absolutely amazing. Chris, you grow a lot, don't you, outside?
Yeah, my I talk about it a lot. My salad bar, which is basically a big deep trough, maybe 30 centimetres, about 1 metre long, and I just drill sow into there, and I tend to sort of do it on a micro crop sort of basis. So I'll sow quite thick, 20 centimetres apart, and a lot of the crops Anton mentioned. Not quite as exotic. I'll stick to sort of salads, rocket and pea shoots. I'm not quite as adventurous, but they come up and I'll get them all going all the way through the year. The growth does slow down a lot in the December and January because of light levels, but I'll just sow 20 centimetre drills and I'll intersow every sort of 3 or 4 weeks, so you've got a constant supply of salad leaves really, and it seems to work all right. I do have to say I have the advantage of being in a south-facing London balcony, so I don't really I've never seen a frost out there in 7 years, so I do have that advantage. The light levels tend to affect growth more than anything.
Okay, well, that's absolutely brilliant. I'm looking forward to a very full salad bowl this winter myself. I'm going to follow all your instructions. So thanks ever so much, Chris and Anton.
Cheers, Fiona.
Thank you.
See you next time.
That's all we've got time for this month. I must let you know that next month we'll be hearing from Pam Corbin, also known as Pam the Jam, who will be talking all about her passion for preserving, bottling, and of course, jam making. So I hope you're looking forward to that. And do send us in your gardening questions. You can contact us via our website or social media. We're at Garden Organic UK on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and LinkedIn. Thanks again to our sponsors, Viridian Nutrition, and to Kevin MacLeod for our theme music. That's it. Until next time.